Hi, I'm Zach Mashburn.
And I'm Rodney Hedrick. We're the founders of Zach and Rodney Ministries. The stories that you're about to hear have forever changed the lives of the people who have lived them. Stories of near-death experiences, ongoing struggles, and tremendous loss, all of which represent the wounds of war and the high cost of freedom. We invite you to listen to the heart of American soldiers and their families as they talk about the tragic events that have left them fighting a different kind of battle, the everyday battle against PTSD. You will hear expert commentary from a doctor who has spent nearly the last decade leading the walking wounded to healing, one of those wounded being her own son.
You'll learn what not to say to soldiers, what you can say, and what you could say once you're close enough to them.
If you're like us, you wanted to help, but you just didn't know where to start. We will address specifically what pastors, church leaders, and the body of Christ can do.
Support that goes beyond the soldier and reaches into the lives of their families.
Though you may have not been a soldier, you can be a warrior, fighting for the hearts and minds of those who are too tired to fight for themselves.
Let's help our veterans. Let's jump in the trenches and drag them to safety. Remember, not all wounds are visible.
My name is Bobby Gray. I'm 31 years old. I'm originally from Birdville, Pennsylvania.
I'm Nakia Gray. I've been married to Bobby for 10 years. We actually just celebrated our 10-year anniversary yesterday.
Decided to join the military back in 2001. The biggest driving force behind that was September 11th. The emotions I was feeling then, being 18 years old in high school, I knew if that meant sacrificing my life, then that's part of it. That's what comes with it, and that's my duty, and that was my job as being a Marine.
We met in May of 2005, about 3 months after he'd gotten back from Iraq. Honestly, for the first year of our marriage, we actually really didn't see each other that often. They deployed on June 6, 2006, and that day was really hard for me, not knowing for sure where he was going and what he was going to be doing, and I couldn't get in touch with him anytime that I wanted to.
You really don't think that what you hear is true. You just kind of, okay, yeah, we're going to Iraq, that's great. And it was a very surreal feeling, but it was a very honorable feeling at the same time.
I think I pretty much slept for the rest of the day. Didn't really want to think about it, didn't want to deal with it. He wanted me to move back home so that I could be surrounded by my family, because we had just gotten married. I didn't really have a chance to get to know anybody on base or anything like that. My family didn't really understand what I was going through. It's weird because you would think that your family would understand you better than anybody else.
My name is James W. Melvin. I'm a retired United States Air Force veteran. I spent 19 years, 10 months, about 22 days in the Air Force. I started out as a short order cook, worked my way up all the way to superintendent of operations. I just figured that the military would be a golden opportunity for me to be able to really travel and see a lot of the world that I know I would never have been able to.
December 3rd, 2004 was one of the hardest days of my life, especially in the Marine Corps and life in general. That day we were hit with a vehicle-borne IED, a truck bomb, had come driving through our back gate and detonated inside our walls. We heard some small arms fire. By the time that we were able to react, the truck bomb had already detonated inside our walls, and it was just havoc. I mean, just fire everywhere, debris falling everywhere. We were all blown out of the building, and I mean, I got up, I was covered in blood on my left side, and I thought that it was my own blood. I'm like, oh man, this isn't good. And you know, a personal inspection of myself, I realized that I was fine. There was nothing wrong with me. A few minutes had passed. We were trying to keep ourselves calm and, you know, just grasp of what was happening, not knowing what had happened. But not too far away from us, where the truck bomb had detonated, we had Marines outside the wire that were doing position improvement on the on our base, our FOB as we call it, Forward Operation Base. They were just doing their duty. They decided, instead of running when they seen the truck bomb, they decided, with no gear except their M16, to engage the enemy and virtually sacrificed himself for the safety of 37 other Marines. Just seeing that night, and never had a chance to really react or grasp of what happened, except just knowing that we had lost 2 Marines. And that was in December. We'd been there since September, and that was the first time that we experienced loss of life.
I'm Wendell Hedrick. I did 20 years in the United States Navy from Trinity, North Carolina. 12 years active and 8 reserves. Retired in 2005. I'm not sure personally if it was the actual combat situation, or fear for your life, or fear for everyone else that's with you, or the ones at home. And it all kind of carries together. It doesn't matter if you're 19 or 49, if you've got parents and friends and kids at home and you have people with you. I had 30 guys that I was in charge of, and to be in a situation where you think chemicals are coming in and you got 40-year-old men crying, with tank rounds exploding, it changes you, and a lot of times you won't understand it till later.
I've been a counselor for over 30 years. Because the adrenal glands affect one's hormones, for instance, testosterone, oftentimes when a soldier first gets home, they're in that honeymoon period. They're very excited about being back with their spouse or their girlfriend or whatever, and they're excited about having special intimate times with them.
We come home March of 2005, and it was a great feeling. It was the sense of completion.
I'd always kind of felt like he just had this piece missing after he had gotten out of the Marines, and I noticed some changes in him shortly after.
Within about 2 weeks, their testosterone has tanked, and they don't feel the drive that they once felt, and so oftentimes they mistake that for, I'm not in love with her anymore. She's silly and needy, and I just need to move out, or I just need to find a girlfriend because this isn't working for me anymore. The marriages of deployed military, the divorce rate is incredibly high. It's 38% higher than the national average of divorce from our deployed military, returning home believing that they're not in love with their spouses anymore.
I'm Lena Meredith. I spent 14 years in the United States Air Force Security Forces, and I'm married to my best friend.
My name's Dwayne Meredith. I served 10 years active duty in the United States Air Force Security Forces and 6 years reserves in the United States Security Forces.
Dwayne and I have pretty much a dark sense of humor. Being first responders, that's how you get a really dark sense of humor, because it really gets to you, because stateside, we're police officers.
Soon after I was medically retired, I did get a job with Sears in Philadelphia, working as loss prevention, apprehending bad guys who were stealing from the store. And after one such incident, I had a flashback in the office. They ended up putting me on administrative leave for a week while they reviewed my files and reviewed everything. They ended up bringing me back, but when it came time for us to move to Idaho from Philadelphia, they decided they weren't going to transfer me out because of incidents like that.
I try really hard to fit in, but I don't fit in. I'm well aware of that, but I have a hard time making girlfriends that I connect with because we don't connect. We have a lot of women my age, we don't have a lot in common with each other because of what I've done, where I've been. Even back in church when I was active duty, I had a hard time with the other church ladies because I was never around, and when I was around, they were like, what were you doing? And I'm like, I can't tell you because, and then the conversation just goes out the window, and I don't fit in, and I have a really hard time making friends. It's something I am working on, though.
It was July 4th weekend, 2005. We were driving up to Reading, Pennsylvania.
We decided to take a long trip and go meet his family. And we had stopped right outside of Washington, D.C. to get some gas.
It was the smell of the fuel, diesel fuel, and going back to the event in Iraq, when we got hit by the truck bomb. That was the first time I was exposed to the same elements, the same smell of what had happened to us in Iraq. And that day I had completely lost control of myself at the gas station, feeling like I was going to die. And I remember screaming at the wife and everyone in the parking lot to get out of here as quick as you can, and felt the need to save everyone that was around me because I refused to let something bad happen to any one of us.
Recently, my wife and I went to a muscular dystrophy walk for a friend of ours whose sister has muscular dystrophy. It's very difficult for us to deal with crowds.
Right now, terrorist organizations are driving vehicles into large crowds, and you want to participate in this, but you never shut down. And with Dwayne and I, we'll actually fan out and have our 360-degree security.
We were constantly on lookout, being vigilant. I had 3 pistols on me at the time, just in case something had happened.
It's a real bummer to be out in a crowd because you're so anxious and you're so on high alert.
That triggered me a little bit because of what we had to deal with over there in Iraq and Afghanistan.
A fun event becomes unpleasant real quick, and it's just uncomfortable.
It was a real tough time. It was hard to enjoy being out with friends when we're constantly being vigilant and our heads are on a swivel and we're listening and looking for everything that could be a threat.
You can't really tell who the enemy is because all of them, it's hard to tell. Little children come up to you and they be padded, they be loaded, they be, you don't know. You just don't know.
This is why we live in this bubble, and I hate to say we live in a bubble because a lot of people don't understand PTSD or traumatic brain injury, which I have, or seizure disorder, which I also have for my traumatic brain injury. And it's not only, the kids have gotten used to it, but initially when I started seizing out, if we went to like the 4th of July parade, they got embarrassed, and I don't want my kids to be embarrassed. Now they don't care, and I wasn't embarrassed.
I first met my husband when I was living in Florida, and he was in the Coast Guard, and he was born on the West Coast. We were married for about 10 years, and he was in the Navy for a couple of years. He went over to Japan and lived there for 2 years, and then he got out of the Navy and he ended up switching over into the Coast Guard. It was when he joined the Army, he became an infantryman. We already had 2 little girls at that time. He was gone a lot. And when he came back, he was only home for about 3 months until he got a phone call and somebody was ready to have him come back on a special team in the Army. So he was home for a short amount of time, and during that time we felt so apart, just so distant. It took us a while just to even reconnect, which was sad. I would have to say the biggest change was in between the deployments. I felt like I was losing him, and on my birthday he asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I said, of course, what any wife would say who loves her man and knows he's going to be leaving. I said, I want family pictures, and that was what I got for my birthday then. That was priceless, having those family pictures done. So he had 2 back-to-back deployments in Afghanistan, and that was really hard on the family. Just not being able to see him not being able to get grounded again spiritually, and with the family, that was difficult.
I mean, you can be gone, if you're on what they call a sea tour for 3 years, you can be gone a year and a half of that easy, just gone. And it's hard, and kids, Yeah, I have teenagers, but and it's like they want things all the time, but they don't really want things. They just want time. And while you're gone, you miss a huge portion of their life. And while you're gone, they miss a huge portion of your life. So my oldest now has gaps where I wasn't even around. I wasn't even home when he was born.
He was a great father. He always cared and was excited to be with our children, and he was there for every birth, all 3 of our children, and then the 4th child, he was deployed in Afghanistan for the first year, and he missed the birth, but he was radioed at the time of the event, and we reached him, and I was able to tell him that he had a son, and that was exciting for him. He sent me roses. That was exciting for me.
The thing that I noticed first off the bat when working with veterans was that their symptoms were so completely different from civilian trauma to military trauma. It was almost opposite. The civilians would often be very sensitive to noise, and yet our military liked having noise around them. It meant there was life around them. And yet the civilians liked to be comforted, but the military veterans were too revved up to be comforted. And they were the comforters. They were the protectors. They didn't like anybody to comfort them.
There's really 2 different kinds of deployment when you're in the service. There's the ones you're going to go on and the ones you don't. The ones you are going to go on are scheduled. Ahead of time, and you and your family, your loved ones, work through almost a separation phase prior to you leaving, to be honest, so it doesn't bother you as bad when you go. And then the ones you don't know about really come as a shock to everybody, especially if you have kids or a wife and you find out, you have to leave in 2 days, and in some cases you don't even know if you're coming back.
Sometimes we would get a call this time of the day, say, be back to the tarmac. We had to live with a bag that was packed with 3 days of clothing. We had no idea where we was going, Sometimes we would get out of the plane, we'd be in Jordan, over in Saudi Arabia somewhere. They would not, I never liked that. They never told us where we was going. They just said, be back to the tarmac certain time, certain time, be back here, ready to go. Go home, kiss your wife, pat the dog.
Kiss everybody goodbye and just, make it quick. Because if you drag it out, what you're gonna do is everybody's gonna get upset, and the more everybody gets upset, the more you get upset. So it's easier just emotionally on everybody just to go. So when you get back from a deployment, and they actually give you training, a lot of people think they don't, but they give you training that don't go home and run in the house and try to take over and be the king of the hill. It's a transition. Like when you leave, there's a transition while you're leaving. So when you come back, there has to be a transition as well. You're in a hyper-vigilant state 24 hours a day, and then you come home, you don't know how not to be in that state. So that's part of the challenge, I think, is understanding that it's okay not to be that way.
Now, with our military, they also may have an exaggerated startle response, but they're usually looking for their weapon, because when they're in country, when they're deployed, they've always got a weapon with them. And so they're patting their leg, they're pulling over their shoulder, they're looking for a weapon. And, it's best to just not notice that. If they say something about it, just smile, shrug your shoulders. It's just not good to put them in the position that they need to defend their actions when it's something that's just so automatic for them.
We don't recognize changes in each other because that's who we were in combat, and when we came home, that's who we were. I recognized some changes in myself and Dwayne too, because I couldn't drive. I really had a really rough time driving in New Jersey, which is anybody would have a rough time driving in New Jersey, but I was having really big panic attacks because I ran a lot of missions outside the wire and with IEDs and all that stuff like that. Our aggression went towards each other because we were there together. So there wasn't anybody really seeing the changes that occurred to us or that had happened with PTSD and things like that because we were together. So it was just him and I, if that makes any sense.
But everybody's so happy that you're back. So nothing else really, really comes into play immediately. And then with time, real life sets back in again. You can't go from not being in a household for 6 months to just showing up and everything going back to the way it was. It's going to be different anytime you leave.
When I got home in 2003, I went to go visit my dad, and it was hunting season, and a gunshot went off, and I took him down by the back of his knees and put him down to the ground as we were walking into the house. And so the next day, we're supposed to go hunting with all my cousins and my uncles, and all we did was sit around the table and drink coffee. We never actually left to go hunting. And I knew it was because of me. No one wanted to take me out in the woods with a gun.
My dad also was a Marine. He was in Korea, and he also came home with some battle scars, some of the hidden wounds of war. I didn't always understand why his temper was out of control. I didn't always understand why he was overprotective, why he didn't want me to go out at night, and why he wanted to know exactly where I was and with whom. He'd seen so much, and there had been so much death around him.
In December of 2007, we had made the decision to get out of the Marine Corps and kind of go try to live civilian life.
I wanted a normal life. I wanted a normal job.
I think some of the hardest part was him not having a job when he came back. That was a big major stress on him to find a job coming back into the community.
I came back and the job I had I still had a job, but the position I had when I left was gone.
They don't have the support system. That's where our churches can make a difference. That's where our communities can make a difference. They need jobs. That's why there's an $11,500 tax write-off if you hire a veteran. Please hire veterans. They need jobs. They're not dangerous. They're not going to hurt you. They need jobs. And they need to be employed right away.
So I don't have a job. I'm 100% disabled because of my seizure disorder, which, like I said, that put me into a real bad tailspin. So I can't be a police officer anymore, and that was my main job stateside in the Air Force. So I went back to school full-time this fall, hopefully. I'm going to go to law school and become a lawyer because I argue really well.
I felt my time in the Marines was over, and I set out to accomplish what I would have wanted to accomplish for this country and myself and my family.
Honestly, that was really hard for both of us, I think, to adjust. Your whole life revolved around them and the military and their mission and what they were doing, and that was your mission, was to make sure that they were capable of carrying out their mission. And to kind of get thrown back into the civilian world, you don't really have that mission anymore.
It's so different with a soldier or a Marine. They feel guilty being home because there are so many others that are still deployed.
He talked a lot about survivor's guilt.
Didn't feel that I deserved to be happy, mostly because it's not fair that I get to live and they don't.
One of my thoughts with the injuries that I have is, survivor's guilt of, we lost people over there, we're still losing people over there. And, I had thoughts in the past of why wasn't it me? How come it had to be this other guy? How come I survived, was able to come home to my family when they were not? And I've had to write letters home to I've had to write letters home to their families to, explain what they did with us and how honorably they served, and explain that their sacrifice was not in vain. It's real hard to deal with. It hurts every day. It really triggers, when I have to talk about it. It's a rough subject to talk about, but, I think it's something that people need to understand.
Oftentimes when our veterans come home, they are confused about God. They don't know if God's mad at them because of the kills that they've had. And so to continue to emphasize the love of God is the most important thing that you can do with any veteran, is to let them know that war's rough, it's tough, it's awful, but that God still loves them and that they were serving their country. There have been wars from the beginning of time, and that God doesn't dislike them and he's not disappointed with them because they were a part of war, and that they're okay, they're free.
I knew I was depressed and kind of just, I guess, hateful with the world, and just, she knew that I wasn't the same person, that I was just, things were getting very bad.
So he struggled a lot with depression. I just kind of always felt like there was just something that was not quite right.
I think the worst part for her was she knew, but I didn't care, or was too reckless to care, or maybe just truly didn't know that anything was wrong because I didn't see it and I thought it was a normal part of life.
PTSD manifests itself in different ways. A lot of people self-medicate with alcohol, other things. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I'd find myself, sitting in a room in the dark, thinking about things and thinking, sometimes to the point of paranoia. Everybody's out to get you. Why has all this ever happened to me? Those sorts of things.
You never stop. You never shut off. You never turn off. You can hear every little thing. I'd watch my kid breathe. I could listen to her. If she stopped snoring, I could hear it from the other room.
It's a feeling of worry about everything, constantly.
Always armed, always, you don't sleep well. I can't sleep without the fan on. It's too quiet right here now for me. You never stop. You never shut down.
He would be his normal self around everyone else, but we would just argue over the tiniest little things.
I was doing everything I could to personally destroy every relationship I had.
I really had a hard time trying to fight for our marriage.
When a person is deployed for 9 months to a year, there are certain physiological things that happen to them that need to be corrected once they get home. I ask every time a new soldier comes into our office whether they have lower back pain. And up to this point, it's 9 years now, I've never had one that hasn't said, yes, I do have lower back pain. And that's because your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys. And they're about the size of a quarter, shaped like a teepee. And when our military deploy, that's the size they are. But when they return from deployment, they're often the size of a raisin because they've been under adrenaline output for so long that the adrenal glands are just tired.
I could definitely see some warning signs, even over our phone conversations when he was in Afghanistan and I heard rockets in the background. So he was having a fear for his life daily.
The one time I called home when I was in Kirkuk, Iraq, because I usually just sent emails, called my dad. So I was actually on the phone with my dad when explosions started happening and gunfire, and it was literally on the other side of the wall from us, and people yelling and sirens going off. Oh, we started getting blown up and mortared, and 249s were going off, and my dad's like, oh my God. I'm like, love you, bye. And he's hearing all of this, and as I'm hanging up the phone on him, he's screaming. So, my poor old man, I feel so bad for him. I put him through the ringer. That was...
Yeah, I think we all have stories like that.
Yeah, it was pretty much a nightmare.
When he threatened to take his life, I knew for certain things were terribly wrong. He had told me over a phone call that he was considering doing what he did. And I knew if I had turned him in, he would be extremely angry at me. it would be very bad. For me, it would be bad because he would be angry that I actually told somebody, and if he didn't mean it, it would have just made me look horrible, like a horrible wife. I had enough fear and respect for him that I called Military One Source. However, I did not go on record with them saying that he had said those words because of the repercussions that it could have had on his job. And if he came home and knew that I was the one that reported him, that wouldn't go well.
The stigma of PTSD is ridiculous. Makes it very, very difficult for people to get help. And as soon as you go to mental health to ask for help because you need help and you know it, they take away your gun. You're on the rubber gun list. Everybody knows, ooh, they're suffering from problems. And that's half the reason why we never went and got help. Something should change when it comes to that policy.
My wife was wanting me to get help. And I was either too stubborn or too ignorant to see that. And that caused a lot of stress over a lot of years.
The amygdalas retain negative memories, and they are also the triggers that signal the adrenal glands to produce adrenaline, which will cause you to fight, flight, or freeze. One of the things that happens with our military is that those amygdalas are generally 30% larger after deployment, and so they have a harder time fighting anger.
We would deal with it in different ways that were not so productive, arguing and fighting. We were against each other. We were taking our aggressions and just acting out on it against each other instead of working with each other.
For me, leading up to the suicide attempt, my family, my direct family, and some of my best friends and closest friends had no idea what I was going through. The only one that had an idea was my wife.
It was very easy for him to seem normal to everybody on the outside.
And her being the only source of comfort I had, I chose to push her away as much as she, over the years, encouraged me to get help, or whether it was to go to the VA or just call one of my fellow Marines I served with to talk to him and open up.
I finally talked him into going to the VA. I had to push him really hard to get him to actually talk to them about the things that we had going on, but he had passed all their tests and everything, so they didn't really do anything about it.
So they took me off all the medication, which was great because that stuff was terrible. The VA likes to give you Skittles.
I think they had put him on some medications or whatever, and he'd taken them for a little while and didn't like the way they made him feel.
They suck. They're not fun for anybody.
The one thing that he would say to me over and over again was, just stop, you're trying to make me think I'm crazy, there's nothing wrong with me. But this look in his eyes that he had that day was like nothing I'd ever seen before.
PTSD say we are not crazy. Make sure he said be sure to tell them we are not crazy. We just have a mental imbalance in our brain and that we just need help, but we are not crazy.
I ended up calling the Veterans Crisis Line. I couldn't do it anymore. And I'd been, doing things to try to ease my own mental thoughts and pain, which a lot of people do. Asking for help is probably the hardest thing you will ever do because you're admitting that you're weak. As a man and a father, and you got 3 kids and a job and responsibilities, you do not want to walk in somewhere and say, I need help, I can't handle this.
When a veteran is deployed, there are incoming missiles all throughout the night. When they go out on missions, they're usually out for anywhere between 12 and 24 hours, sometimes days at a time. So in those cases, they are under stress constantly.
When I'm driving down the road, one of the side effects of PTSD is, you have memories of roadside bombs, and my truck got hit. And when I drive down the road to this day, I get very nervous, very anxious over debris on the side of the road or dead animals on the side of the road. Today, for instance, I was driving to the grocery store and there's a couple of 5-gallon buckets laying in the gutter on the side of the road, and I veered clear across the other lanes just to get away from them.
And can you imagine knowing that you have to go back out there the next day and do the same thing over again? And the next day you have to go back out and do the same thing over again. And the next day, the tours, some people spend 3 or 4 tours over there in the desert.
One of the things we found with SPECT scans is that the hippocampus, which holds on to, like I said, long-term memory, long-term past memories, that hippocampus shrinks 30% while deployed. That means that all the soft memories usually go.
My mind was blown because I was gone for so long.
So, and we were already starting to fall apart with our marriage. He was not writing me like he would write me daily, and he stopped writing me daily through the internet, through email. Things were definitely not looking good for our marriage. I could just tell he was separating from us, from his family, from his children that he normally loved and was very interested in. He did not even have much of an interest to be around or to know. Even when he came back, it was not good.
Things like your hormones, estrogen, testosterone, things like all of your happy juices, all of the things that make you feel good about your life, like serotonin, enkephalin, norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins. Those glands decide whether you're going to get any of those happy hormones. If you don't have happy hormones, you're going to be depressed. And you may have a lot of anxiety. And so you may be cranky and you may feel touchy. And you may not be as patient or tolerant with your family as you once were.
There's a mental imbalance with PTSD, sort of like a concussion, and it don't get well overnight.
I have traumatic brain injury, and it's all around the right side of my brain, and they said it's like a road rash, and they're looking at it through the CAT scan or whatever it is, and seizure disorders, and they're trying to correlate the two so that we can learn more about why I have seizures, because once they realize that I didn't have, I have traumatic brain injury, but they want to know how that correlates with PTSD and what triggers the seizures.
During an explosion in Iraq, I had concussed the front end of my brain into my skull, and there's a sharp point on the inside of your skull above your eyebrow, and it had essentially killed the frontal lobe of my brain. And they explained to me that that part of the brain is the filter from the brain to the mouth, among other things, some memory stuff. And it's caused me some troubles with being out in public and speaking. I'm pretty blunt, obviously, because of it, and people don't know how to take it, and a lot of times it can cause some troubles.
My name is Jim Joyce. I'm a U.S. Army retired Command Sergeant Major, Vietnam veteran and as well as a veteran of the Gulf War in 1990-91. The room you're in right now is our Wall of Honor here at the Heritage Park Veterans Museum in McDonough, Georgia. What you see here is 76 pictures of fallen Georgia heroes on this wall. 77 if you look at the one picture that's in the corner on the table here. Of the people that are on the wall, the youngest is just 2 weeks past his 18th birthday. The oldest one is actually 2 months shy of his 48th birthday. Of the 76 people that you see on this wall, 5 of them took their own life after multiple deployments overseas. I'm the only one in this building that knows who those 5 are, and I will never tell. The one thing, though, that really people need to know and understand is every picture up here has a family associated with them. And those families also suffer just like some of the people that were on this wall.
When a soldier feels helpless, they hate that feeling so badly because in every other situation, they're generally in charge. And so when they feel anger, it feels better to them than feeling helpless. And so sometimes they feel that anger. However, if they're covering up helplessness, then oftentimes they will feel suicidal. And so if you put anger with as a coping strategy for helplessness, and then on top of that, you may put alcohol to feel calmer, they may try to calm themselves down with alcohol, then you've got a lethal problem, because the next step is oftentimes suicidal ideas. That can be one of those permanent solutions for a temporary condition.
Memorial Day 2013, I don't remember going to work. I don't remember a single thing from that day. My next memory was I woke up in the hospital, and I remember laying there in bed and looking to my left and looking to my right, and I knew that the situation I was in was serious. I couldn't move, and there was nothing I could do.
We had been arguing back and forth a little bit throughout the day. He went into the bedroom, and a few minutes later I heard the door open to the bedroom, and I heard the back door slam, and so I just assumed that he was getting in his truck to go drive around and try to release some steam. A few minutes later, I got the feeling that I needed to go check on him, so I walked outside and his truck was in the driveway, and I got my cell phone and I tried to call him, and he wouldn't answer. And so a few minutes later I got a text message from him that said, "I love you, I'm sorry, and I always will." My heart just sank to the floor, and I knew that something was terribly wrong.
They explained to me that I had attempted suicide, and I told them that that's not possible. That's not what happened.
I heard the rustling of these leaves, and I just took off running. And when I got to, it was this big magnolia tree in the very back of our yard, I looked up and I saw him hanging there from an extension cord. I just screamed at the top of my lungs. I didn't know what else to do. He was so far up in the tree that even standing on my tippy toes, I couldn't touch his feet. I had no clue how he had even gotten up there. There was no ladder around or anything. I yelled at the neighbor to go get a ladder to come help cut him down, and I was on the phone with 911 by that time. I ran back over to him, and his lips were already blue. His body had already started shutting down. I checked his pulse, and he had a pretty weak pulse, but he wasn't breathing. So I started giving him CPR, and he finally gasped for breath. And I just stood there and held him until the paramedics got there.
I was in and out of consciousness, or just coherent.
They had him in a medically induced coma for about a week and a half. They couldn't give us any guarantees of whether he was going to survive, and if he did, what the outlook was going to be like. The longer that he went without waking up, the less likely he would have of surviving or making a full recovery.
Up until that day, and even my entire life, suicide was never an option. Never something that, as bad as anything could possibly be, that's not an answer. That's nothing that I would ever do.
I didn't know if he woke up, whether he was going to hate me for saving his life, or whether he was going to be glad that I'd saved his life.
My wife come walking in, and I knew, well, how's that my wife?
He reached his arms out, and I ran to him and hugged him, and he was like, "I'm so happy to see you."
Waking up, and they explained to me what happened. They let me get up, and they walked me to a mirror, and I could see the mark on my throat, and I knew then that, all right, well, what they're saying was true.
I'd be an absolute liar to say that I never had suicidal thoughts. I'd never said that to the military when I was active duty, but I'd be totally lying.
One big coping thing that we've found helps us out a lot is humor. We try to find humor in everything to kind of alleviate the stress and not bottle up everything. We joke about pretty sinister stuff just to get it out, but do it in a fun way, so we're not crying and we're not reliving those moments in a horrible, horrible way.
10 days before he passed away, he went to the VA. The counselor assessed him as having PTSD, and he was supposed to go back, but he died the day before his appointment.
I'm a PTSD survivor. My doctor, she is the only reason that I am able to stand here right now and talk to you as I look into this camera lens.
You have to take time. You have to realize what you can do and can't do. And you have to go for help, and you have to, if the doctor gives you medication, you have to take it. Because historically what happens is you start feeling better and you say, I don't need this, and you stop taking it, and then you go back down a rat hole again.
The children still keep his pictures in their room, and they get to see his face, and that helps. Also, while he was on the deployment, I had the kids each have a daddy doll, which is this cute little doll that looks like him, and they sleep with them.
Mom, you know what? I won't bring any other stuffed animals, but I'll bring Daddy.
And on the doll, it says something that he wanted to tell them. So for my daughter, it says, Daddy loves you. And that's a keepsake that they'll have forever.
If somebody's struggling with this stuff, you'll never know, because they're not going to tell you.
First of all, you have to admit that you need help. Because if you're in denial, no one can help you.
And that's the hardest thing for people to do because of pride and the stigma that goes along with, having some sort of condition.
It's difficult because we feel so strong, and you're so like, I'm a military girl, I was combat vet twice, I don't need help. It's better than taking your own life, and
There's got to be something higher that helps you out. You just can't do it yourself.
I didn't like the stigma. I didn't like the word PTSD. I didn't want that associated with me.
He didn't want what had happened and his diagnosis to define him.
I still didn't feel comfortable around friends and family because I always felt like they were just looking at me in a weird, different light.
Everybody was, I don't want to say scared of him, but I guess they didn't really know how to act around him, whether it would trigger something else to happen or just really didn't know what to say or how to deal with it.
If you are feeling any kind of symptoms or what you even think is a symptom of PTSD, get some help, ask some questions, find out, because that may mean the difference between you, life and death, and the happiness and well-being of your family.
be strong, you can do it, go ask for help.
You can't tell them to get help, but if you notice something going on, maybe you try to ask them in a way that they won't see as implying that they're weak.
I've personally helped a friend who was expressing dark thoughts about possibly harming himself. I personally reached out to him and said, hey, listen, private message me and I'll give you my phone number so we can just talk.
Biggest thing, even if it's one person, two people that you can talk to that have similar experiences to understand. Because what many people face is they come home and they have nobody to talk to.
Regardless of the PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, whatever it was, I felt that I had control, and I was absolutely wrong. And I was still at the lowest point of my life, confused, mad, no idea how to resolve what had happened, scared that this may happen again. I struggled with that regardless of enrolling in the VA.
When soldiers get home and they don't have a job and they are losing their house and their marriages are falling apart and their kids are screaming at them, they feel pretty helpless. Then, if they're told that this PTSD is a permanent condition, that they're never really going to be better, that they're always going to be traumatized by dreams and nightmares, sweaty palms, anxiety, depression, poor relationships, and not finding pleasure in anything they once found pleasure in. No wonder the suicide rate is at 23 a day in America, with 17 states failing to report whether they've had a suicide or not. If they lose hope and all they feel is helplessness, then why should they try?
It was a year after his accident. He decided that he was just going to own up to what happened, and he was going to let everybody know. He was going to quit being ashamed of it.
Something just come over me that this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't my style of life.
Here's what I believe. If it's a disorder, it can come back into order. I believe that our soldiers are not cursed with post-traumatic stress disorder the rest of their lives. I believe there's things that we can do about it.
Seek help. So important. You have to be the one to go out and seek the help, because it's not going to come and find you. You have to do it yourself. Families have to be able to recognize that their loved one is having some issues, all right, and let them come and help you and get you help. But by all means, whatever you do, you have to get help. And don't be embarrassed about getting help at all.
I was able to start telling myself that PTSD is not a bad thing, and you can make it a bad thing, you can make it a positive thing.
When I stopped doing the things to self-medicate, and I stopped causing stress in the home, then the family started to heal as I heal.
I look back now and I would have made some changes. I would have definitely stepped in and got him some help. I tried calling the chaplain, but they couldn't force him to have any counseling. And thankfully, a dear friend did step in, and he actually did go to the vet office 10 days before he died. But at that point, it was already too late for him.
It's said that everybody who goes into combat finds God almost immediately. And as far as, how pastors could deal with veterans with these issues, reach out to your congregation and get those veterans together to discuss their issues and just sit in with them and listen.
As a pastor and as an evangelist, it has always been a focus of my ministry to try to bring encouragement to those who are overwhelmed by the struggles of life. And one of the passages in the Word of God that I've used many times is in the book of Corinthians, where the Apostle Paul is speaking about the thought of comfort. He tells us in verse 3, "Blessed be God, even the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforteth us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God."
A lot of time when people go to counseling, they can give you the academic side of the counseling session, but they cannot give you the spiritual side. And there's a distinct difference in the spiritual side and the academic side, okay? Sure, you can fill in all the blanks academically, but until you can fill in the blanks spiritually, you have only halfway completed the process.
Pastors, ask the newly redeployed for a cup of coffee. Ask them to tell you how you can get involved in helping them. Ask them to dinner. If you're a neighbor of military, ask them over for dinner. Ask them if you can take care of their children for an evening and let them go out with their spouse and just have an evening of rest with their spouse.
I've had a lot of the Marines I served with open up to me, thanking me and talking to me about the issues. And that point is when I really felt inside that it was okay, because I was still very intimidated and scared to talk about what I was happening.
They don't even see their brothers in arms that deployed with them for generally 90 days after deployment. And there's nothing like a soldier that can read a soldier. They need to be seeing each other sooner. Department of Defense, they need to be seeing each other sooner. I know you want to give them a break, but they need to be looking each other in the eyes. They can tell if they're not doing okay.
You're not the only one, because that's just, you don't think anyone's dealing with it, but everybody is.
People who have been in combat and been in war and have had to deal with that stuff, they deal with it daily, and it really affects not just them.
The biggest thing somebody can do is make yourself available to listen, in compassion without pity.
You just need to sit down and, yeah, brother, I love you, I care about you, and I want to listen to you. Just talk to me. You'd be surprised what they would do to somebody sometime.
He had so many great characteristics that he taught me. He taught me a whole lot. And when he was with his family, he loved us. He loved what he did. So when he was working, he put his whole heart into it.
There's 22 military suicides a day. That's one every 65 minutes. And veteran military suicides, the death rate from that, the death toll from that is higher than the Iraq and Afghanistan wars combined.
It's one day at a time. You know, it's being thankful every morning that you're on one side of the ground and the sun came up, and, you know, focusing on that day or short-term goals, not looking at something a month, 3 months, 6 months from now you can't control.
What I would do differently is just get more involved in the person's life. If you know that they're falling away and you're feeling the separation from them, reach out to them. There is a way to make them come back. There is. I know there is. So I have hope for those that are actually experiencing the depression and the post-traumatic stress. I have hope that they can come out of it, and it doesn't have to end the way it did for my soldier.
As a word of encouragement to other pastors, we will encounter all sorts of people in our congregations who have great needs. Many times the struggles and the problems are so complex, but yet we have the greatest answer that we can give today, and that is found in God's Word. May I encourage you today, encourage those who are broken, help those who are wounded, and let them know the love of Jesus Christ in their life.
It's a serious, serious issue. And if you get help, you can survive and make your way through it. Believe me, I know. I'm there, I've been there, I am there, and I will be there in the future. But get some help.
You need to be honest with them. When I do counseling, one of the things I tell folks, I'm gonna be brutally honest with you. But a lot of people don't want the truth. They don't want the truth. And ain't but so much that you can tell them without telling them the truth. You see, I don't think anything that you shouldn't ask, because they need to see themselves for what they are not, but for what they can become. Just because you're in a mess now don't mean you have to stay that way.
I hate to say it, but a lot of civilians don't understand it. And being a military person, when you don't even understand it, what's happening, it's really bad, and it can be really taxing on relationships. I love you.
I love you too.
In 2009, our only child deployed. It was a horrible deployment. So many were lost during that deployment. So many tragic things happened, and tragic things happened to our son. I'd like to say that because he had a wonderful childhood, and he did, that he came home and everything was just fine, but it wasn't fine, and we weren't fine. There was a depth of pain that I can't even express. It was absolutely horrible. Coping strategies that weren't working, that nearly killed him. There were suicide attempts. There were depressive times that all of us experienced, that we just thought we couldn't take another breath or put another foot in front of the other. We got help. I want you to know this does work, and that what is out of order absolutely can come back into order. Please don't give up. Please don't hurt yourself. Please don't take your life. Your life can be wonderful again. Our son's life is wonderful again. He's married. He's happy. They own a home. They love their lives. They love their work. But there were dark, dark days. I can't tell you that there weren't days that we fell on our faces screaming out to God. Please trust that your lives will be back again. Trust God.
Granted, I wouldn't want to go through what I've went through, but I still love this country. I don't blame our government. I don't blame the Iraq War, Afghanistan War for anything that myself, my wife, my family has been through to this day. It's still, besides getting married, it's still the single most biggest accomplishment was to serve this country, and I will love this country till the day I die.